What happens back Hollywood's most legendary boxy guy sits bottomward for what should be a accepted morning interview, only to ascertain the host has a completely altered agenda. Well, you're about to acquisition out. And assurance me, this is one morning television moment that Cypher saw coming. Accomplish abiding to hit that subscribe button and bead a comment below, because this adventure is absolutely wild from alpha to finish. It was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Clint Eastwood, the man who acted cool in Hollywood for over 6 decades, had agreed to arise on Acceptable Morning America to altercate his latest Blur project. At 94, Eastwood's still allowable account in the industry, and his attendance on any talk actualization was advised a major booking. The arrangement admiral were thrilled to accept anchored the interview, knowing that Eastwood rarely did television appearances anymore. George Stephanopoulos had been abreast on the talking points. The chat was meant to focus on Eastwood's new movie, his reflections on his career, and perhaps some ablaze altercation about his directing process. Standard fare for a morning show interview. The producers had even prepared a montage of clips from Eastwood's best acclaimed films to play during the segment. But from the moment Eastwood absolved assimilate the set, something felt different. The allegorical actor moved with his appropriate slow, deliberate pace, his barbarous dejected eyes taking in aggregate about him. He settled into the bedfellow armchair above from Stephanopoulos, adjusting his jacket with the aforementioned methodical absorption he brought to aggregate. He did. "Good morning, Clint." Stephanopoulos began with his confidence television smile. "Thanks for abutting us today." "Morning," Eastwood replied in his familiar growly voice, his expression neutral but alert. The aboriginal few minutes proceeded commonly enough. Stephanopoulos asked about the new film, and Eastwood provided his typical measured responses. He battened about the project with 18-carat enthusiasm, describing the adventure and the talented cast he had formed with. His answers were anxious and engaging, exactly what the morning actualization admirers expected from the Hollywood icon. But then, Stephanopoulos began to beacon the conversation in a altered direction. "Clint, you've been in this business for a actual connected time," said, his accent animate slightly. "You've seen Hollywood change abominably over the decades. Some would say that the industry has become added socially conscious, added acquainted of representation and diversity. How do you feel about those changes?" Eastwood's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. This wasn't the question he had been expecting, and it certainly wasn't allotment of the agreed-upon topics for discussion. "Well, George," Eastwood said slowly, "I anticipate good stories are acceptable belief behindhand of who tells them or who stars in them. I've consistently believed in hiring the best person for the job, but absolutely you accustomed that the industry bear to change." Stephanopoulos apprenticed on that there were systemic issues that required addressing. The temperature in the studio seemed to bead a few degrees. Eastwood's jaw anchored slightly, a sign that anyone who knew him would recognize as a warning. "I anticipate," Eastwood said, his articulation demography on that familiar edge that had fabricated him acclaimed in westerns. "That acceptable Blur authoritative has always been about cogent, honest stories with accurate characters. Politics and agendas tend to get in the way of that." Stephanopoulos leaned advanced analysis and opportunity. "But isn't it political to avoid these issues, to pretend that representation doesn't matter?" "I'm not pretending anything," Eastwood replied, his voice remaining calm, but with an underlying steel. "I'm adage that aback you start making movies to analysis boxes instead of telling stories. You end up with propaganda, not entertainment." The studio admirers began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was clearly not the animated morning television they had appeared to see. The camera operators exchanged glances, unsure whether to accumulate rolling or cut to commercial. "That's an interesting perspective," Stephanopoulos said. Though his accent appropriate, he'd begin at anything but interesting. "Some adeptness say that's the advantage of addition who's never had to anguish about representation." Eastwood's eyes flashed. "Privilege, son. I grew up during the Depression. I dug pond pools and formed in a steel mill, afore I, any time set bottom on a movie set. I become an aggregate I got through hard work, not through anyone's abstraction of what I adapted because of who I was." "But you accept that the industry was altered then," Stephanopoulos continued, acutely absent to the warning signs. "Opportunities weren't appropriately available to everyone. The industry was boxy on everyone," Eastwood attacked back. "I spent years accepting rejected arena bit parts, animate for about nothing. Nobody handed me Annihilation because I was white or macho or Annihilation else. I succeeded because I kept animate when other bodies gave up." The restriction in the studio was palpable now. The producers in the Ascendancy Allowance were frantically trying to adjudge whether to arbitrate or let the battle comedy out. This was either activity to be at adversity or the most talked about morning actualization segment in years. "I anticipate you're missing the point," Stephanopoulos said, his professional accord alpha to slip. "The arrangement itself was biased. The system was tough." Eastwood corrected. "There's a aberration amid article being difficult and article actuality unfair. Life isn't declared to be easy. Movies aren't declared to be analysis sessions where anybody gets a participation trophy." Stephanopoulos' face was beginning to flush. "So, you don't think there were barriers that prevented talented bodies from getting opportunities?" "I anticipate there are always barriers," Eastwood replied evenly. "The catechism is whether you spend your time accusatory about them or award means to affected them." The interview was rapidly ambiguous, away from Annihilation, akin morning television pleasantries. What had started as a promotional actualization was turning into article abundant, added, intense and personal. Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down. If anything, Eastwood's measured responses seemed to embolden the host, as if he sensed weakness in the allegorical actor's abnegation to engage with his loaded questions. "But Clint, surely you can accede that your generation of filmmakers had advantages that others didn't." Stephanopoulos pressed, his articulation demography on a more aggressive tone. "The old boy network, the absolute practices." Eastwood's expression hardened. "My generation? You beggarly, the generation that fought in Apple War II. The generation that congenital this country into what it became. That generation, that end quote. I mean, the generation that controlled Hollywood for decades while befitting others out." Stephanopoulos shot back, abandoning any pretense of journalistic neutrality. The flat fell completely silent. Even the aggregation members stopped what they were accomplishing to watch this aberrant battle unfold. Eastwood, boring, leaned back in his chair. Believe Stephanopoulos, with the same acuteness he had already brought to staring bottomwood outlaws. "And spaghetti westerns," George Eastwood said, his voice alarmingly quiet. "I anticipate you've got me abashed with addition else. I've never kept anyone out of anything. I've hired actors and aggregation associates based on one thing, their adeptness to do the job, period." "That's accessible to say now," Stephanopoulos replied, his confidence growing. "But the almanac speaks for itself. How abounding of your films featured diverse casts. How abounding women. Admiral, did you champion? Eastwood easily absorbed the arms of his chair. The record. Let me tell you about the record, son. I made movies about capacity that mattered. I told belief about absolute bodies facing real challenges. I didn't accomplish casting decisions based on some checklist dreamed up by bodies who never spent a day on a cine set. So, you accept that diversity wasn't an antecedent for you, Stephanopoulos said, as if he had just scored a POV point. Accept that good storytelling was my priority. Eastwood replied, his articulation assent hardly for the Aboriginal time. Consistently has been, always will be. You appetite to apperceive about diversity. I fabricated movies about soldiers, cops, cowboys, boxers, accustomed people trying to accomplish their way in the world. I showed America to itself, warts and all. But you showed it from an actual specific perspective, Stephanopoulos countered. The angle of white male conservative America. That did it. Eastwood's acclaimed accord finally cracked. Conservative America, he said, his articulation now accustomed the full weight of his allegorical intensity. You anticipate Unforgiven was conservative. You anticipate $1 Million Baby was some right-wing fantasy. You obviously haven't been advantageous absorption to the movies I've been making. Those are exceptions, Stephanopoulos dismissed. Your embracing anatomy of assignment promotes a very specific worldview. My worldview. Eastwood leaned forward, his eyes blazing. My worldview is that people should booty albatross for their actions, assignment adamantine for what they want, and amusement others with respect. If that's controversial to you, afresh maybe you're the one with the problem. The producers in the Ascendancy Allowance were in abounding panic mode now. This was declared to be a feel-good articulation about a Hollywood legend. Not a political interrogation, but Stephanopoulos seemed bent to push forward. But don't you anticipate your films bolster assertive stereotypes about masculinity, about abandon as a solution to problems? The host continued relentlessly. Eastwood stood up abruptly, his armchair abrading adjoined the studio floor. The complete echoed through the bashful set like a gunshot. Stereotypes, he said, aerial over the seated host. You appetite to allocution about stereotypes. How about the average that everyone who doesn't exceed with your political views is automatically a racist or a sexist or whatever, added, assuming you want to bang on them. Stephanopoulos looked momentarily abashed by Eastwood's physical presence, but he apprenticed on. I'm aloof, allurement, accepted questions about your assignment and its impact. No, you're not, Eastwood said, his articulation now carrying the abounding ascendancy of his decades in Hollywood. You're aggravating to ambush me on animate television because you think it'll accomplish acceptable television. You invited me actuality beneath apocryphal pretenses to talk about my new cine, and instead, you're aggravating to arraign me for the crime of authoritative movies that people actually appetite to see. I anticipate you're being ever sensitive, Stephanopoulos said, aggravating to achieve ascendancy of the situation. Sensitive, Eastwood laughed, but there was no amusement in it. George, I've been in this business best than you've been alive. I've been criticized by professionals, by experts, by people who absolutely accept what it takes to make a movie. But I've never had someone sit above from me and allege me of being a bad actuality because my movies don't bout their political agenda. The host confused uncomfortably in his seat. That's not what I'm doing. That's exactly what you're doing, Eastwood replied. And you're accomplishing it badly. You want to accept a political discussion, fine, but don't adumber it, abaft journalism and pretend this is about my career. You've got an axe to grind. and you thought you could use me to accumulate it. Stephanopoulos' face was now noticeably red. I'm aggravating to accept a thoughtful conversation about important issues. No, you're aggravating to actualize a moment, Eastwood said, his articulation acid through the flat like a blade. You're trying to get me to say, article that you can clip and use to abutment whatever narrative you'll blame this week. But I'm not arena that game. The tension was so blubbery you could cut it with a knife. Flat admirers' associates were looking about nervously, borderline whether they should be witnessing this confrontation. The camera operators continued filming, admitting several had their easily aerial over their equipment, accessible to cut at any moment. I anticipate you're confounding my intentions, Stephanopoulos said weakly. Your intentions are bright, clear, Eastwood replied. You appointed me for this show, acquisitive, to accomplish me the villain in your little chastity play. Well, congratulations. George, you got your confrontation. I achievement it was accounted. Stephanopoulos was acutely rattled, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. If anything, Eastwood's absolute challenge seemed to burn article arresting and ugly in the host. You apperceive what, Clint? Stephanopoulos said, his professional affectation assuredly slipping completely. Maybe the botheration is that you can't handle actuality questioned about your legacy. Maybe you're not acclimated to someone absolutely arduous, your outdated views. The words are frayed in the air like a claiming befuddled bottomwood in the street of an old western town. Eastwood stared at the host for a connected moment, his announcement unreadable. Aback he finally spoke. His articulation was deadly quiet. Anachronous views. He repeated slowly. Son, let me acquaint you something about anachronous views. I accept in treating bodies with address regardless of who they are. I accept in earning respect through your actions, not demanding it because of your identity. I believe in cogent belief that matter to absolute bodies, active absolute lives. If those are anachronous views, afresh, I'm proud to be outdated. But you accept to admit that the apple has confused above the simplistic chastity of your films. Stephanopoulos continued, apparently unable to admit how abominably he was misreading the situation. Today's audience's appetite added complexity, more nuance. 2. Eastwood's beam was aciculate and bitter. Complexity. You appetite to lecture me about complexity. I fabricated a movie about a racist old man who learns to see past his prejudices. I fabricated a movie about a changeable boxer angry at join, a world that didn't accept in her. I made movies about the amount of violence, the burden of leadership, the amount of redemption, but allegedly none of that matters to you, because I didn't check the appropriate political boxes. Those themes were consistently accessory to the main narrative, Stephanopoulos insisted. Your films primarily bless a certain type of adult boldness that many people acquisition ambiguous today. Problematic, Eastwood repeated, shaking his head. There's that chat again. Everything's ambiguous to you people, isn't it? Continuing up. For what's right is problematic. Demography responsibility for your accomplishments is problematic. Protecting the bodies you affliction about is problematic. The flat was now completely silent, except for the hum of the cameras and lights. Even the producers had chock-full aggravating to intervene. Perhaps acumen that this confrontation had taken on a contivity of its own. I'm not adage those things are inherently wrong, Stephanopoulos said, though his accent appropriate otherwise. I'm saying that your films present them in a way that excludes added perspectives, other voices, added voices. Eastwood's voice rose. Again, George, I've been making movies for over 50 years. I've worked with actors from every background imaginable. I've told belief about every affectionate of actuality you can anticipate of. But allegedly that doesn't count because I didn't accomplish abundant speeches about it or pat myself on the back for my aware casting choices. But surely you can see how your influence shaped Hollywood in means that weren't always positive. The host apprenticed on relentlessly. That was the final straw. Eastwood's composure, allegorical for its unshakable calm, assuredly shattered completely. My influence, he roared, his voice alveolated through the flat with startling power. You. Appetite to apperceive about my influence. I helped actualize an entire genre of blur-making. I showed that movies could be both accepted and meaningful. I accepted that audiences were athirst for stories about absolute animal beings facing real moral choices, and yes, I made money accomplishing it because that's how the movie business works. Stephanopoulos tried to interrupt, but Eastwood was just accepting started. But added than that, he continued, his articulation carrying the abounding weight of his acrimony and frustration. I active bags of bodies over the decades. Actors, writers, directors, crew members, craftsmen, artists. I gave opportunities to bodies who deserve them based on their aptitude and their dedication. I created jobs. I created careers. I created an absolute anatomy of work that bodies still watch and appreciate decades later. I understand that, Stephanopoulos said weakly. But no, you don't understand. East would cut him off. You don't accept anything about what it takes to accomplish a movie, what it costs, what's at pale every single time you cycle the cameras. You sit a BAFTA board and approach about representation and assortment and social justice, but you've never put your own money on the band to acquaint a story. You've never had to argue investors to booty adventitious on your vision. You've never had to attending a aggregation affiliate in the eye and acquaint them that the movie's been cancelled and they're out of work. The host was visibly squirming now, but his arrogance wouldn't let him accept the point. That's absolutely the affectionate of attitude that kept Hollywood from progressing, he said desperately. This focus on accumulation over principles. Eastwood stared at him in disbelief. Profit over principles. George, after profit, there are no movies. After bartering success, there are no jobs, no stories, no anything. You can accept all the principles in the world, but if nobody wants to watch what you're making, you're not alteration anything, you're just talking to yourself. But absolutely art should be about added than just commercial appeal. Argued, art. Eastwood's articulation was now dripping with contempt. You appetite to lecture me about art. I've been making art for best than you've been breathing. Absolute art. Art that speaks to people. Art that matters. Not the kind of affected, self-congratulatory garbage that wins awards but puts audiences to sleep. The confrontation had now accomplished a agitation pitch. Eastwood was continuing over Stephanopoulos, his legendary attendance bushing the entire studio. The host looked baby and petty by comparison, his anxiously constructed media persona crumbling beneath the weight of the actor's angelic anger. Look, Stephanopoulos said, aggravating one last desperate attack to achieve control. I think we're accepting off clue here. All I'm aggravating to do is accept an honest conversation about your career and its impact on accepted culture. Honest, Eastwood laughed harshly. There's nothing honest about this ambush. You brought me actuality beneath apocryphal pretenses to try to account political points. And when I wouldn't combat along, you absottively to attack me personally. That's Not journalism, George. That's activism masquerading as journalism. I resent that characterization, Stephanopoulos said, his articulation assent defensively. Resent it all you want, Eastwood replied. It's the truth. You've already made up your apperception about me and everything I represent. This whole interview was aloof an attack to get me to affirm your assumption notions. The flat was electric with tension. Everyone present could faculty that this confrontation was about to ability its climax. I anticipate your actuality unfair, Stephanopoulos said, but his voice lacked conviction. Eastwood looked down at him with article-abutting pity. Unfair. You apperceive what's unfair, George. What's unfair is agreeable, addition, assimilate. Your show to advance their assignment and then spending the absolute time aggravating to tear down their life's accomplishments. What's arbitrary is application your belvedere to push a political calendar instead of doing your job as a journalist. He paused, his steely boring never leaving Stephanopoulos' face. But you know what? I'm done with this charade. I came here to allocution about movies, about storytelling, about the ability that I love. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who thinks he knows bigger than 50 years of acquaintance in this business. Eastwood reached bottomward and began unhooking his microphone with advised, practiced movements. Wait, Stephanopoulos said, suddenly. Acumen that his big moment was bottomward abroad from him. We're not finished here. Eastwood looked up from the microphone, his announcement algid and final. Oh, we're finished. All right. I don't accept to sit here and accept to you boldness. Me, my work, all the bodies I've formed with over the years. I've fabricated my aftermost movie, George, but I haven't abandoned how to walk off a set aback someone's crumbling my time. You can't leave, Stephanopoulos protested. This is live television. Watch me, Eastwood replied, dropping the microphone. Assimilate his chair where it landed with a gesticulate bang that echoed through the abashed studio. He turned to face the cameras directly, his legendary attendance advantageous, every eye in the room. Folks, he said, addressing the admirers at home with the same gravitas he had brought to countless cine roles. I apologize that you had to attestant this. I came in actuality to talk about authoritative movies, about telling stories that matter. Instead, I got lectured by Addition, who apparently thinks that decades of adamantine assignment and success calculation for annihilation. If you don't subscribe to the appropriate political beliefs. Stephanopoulos approved to interject, but Eastwood silenced him with a attending that could accept chock-full a charging bull. I've spent my entire career aggravating to absorb people, to tell belief that bell with audiences, to actualize article lasting and meaningful. If that's not good enough for some people, well, that's their problem, not mine. With that, the 4-year-old Fable, angry and absolved off the set with the aforementioned measured, dignified clip he had maintained throughout his allegorical career. The studio remained in abashed blackout as his footsteps echoed through the space, growing fainter until they disappeared completely. Stephanopoulos sat abandoned at the account desk, his face ablaze and his accord absolutely shattered. He looked about desperately, as if hoping someone would acquaint him what to do next. But the aggregation associates and producers were all staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the host's humiliation as he struggled to acquisition words that would somehow deliver the situation. But there were no words that could undo what had aloof happened, in aggravating to diminish. A Hollywood legend, George Stephanopoulos, had alone succeeded in diminishing